Okay, so I have some notes here. The first question is asking us to discuss global sexual slavery. And this involves trafficking of both the women and children. And basically, they're being forced into working as prostitutes and sex workers. It does discuss women in foreign countries who are prostitutes by choice. However, many are forced into it. And so that's really what this section focuses on. And it focuses on where and how many of these women and children are being transported to foreign countries, even kidnapped at times, and forced into prostitution. And so a lot of these numbers were quite shocking, from 25,000 in Japan to 70,000 in Thailand. And specifically there, the book mentioned these hostesses who work as sex slaves, and even stated that 200,000 Bangladeshi women have been kidnapped and forced into prostitution in Pakistan. So those numbers are definitely significant. Now, while these are prostitutes that are of age, the underage prostitute numbers were equally as harsh, in my opinion. You have 800,000 in Thailand, 400,000, and 250,000 in Brazil, to 60,000 in the Philippines. Child prostitution is rampant in these areas, but not only these places. It's increased in Russian and Eastern European cities. And while these countries aren't mentioned as much in this section, some of the Asian and African and South American countries, the underage prostitutes specifically, those are referenced towards the end of the text. And something that really stood out to me was that customers are requesting children under the age, with the belief that they're less likely to contract AIDS and infections that way, when in reality children are more vulnerable to these infections because they are more likely to succumb to injuries during intercourse, which I found completely horrifying and ironic as well when it comes to the growing market for underage prostitutes. And with that being said, some of the causes that they had mentioned are, the AIDS epidemic, pornography, peep shows. There are these things called sex tours that are growing in popularity, and these are responsible somewhat for the demands in children. And so in some of these countries, like the Philippines, Thailand, that are mentioned multiple times, these places are really popular for sex tours. And so basically people will come from other places, a lot of times the Western countries where it is not as acceptable. They'll come to these places just because they know that they're guaranteed to find what they're looking for as far as the underage market. And in some of these places, it has become pretty normal for these things to occur. For example, in Vietnam, fathers are acting as pimps for their daughters, and it's just pretty normal for them. And when they interviewed one of the fathers and asked him, why he felt the need to sell his daughter for money, he said that, she earned her $300 and that was all that they needed, and that she can stop now, and it was pretty normal occurrence for them. And so when I thought about this, I thought about the social disorganization theory and how it states that people live in similar environments behave in similar ways. So a young female, for example, growing up in Vietnam, it might be normal for her to expect that when she gets of a certain age, in order to help her family out, that, she may have to enter into prostitution. And over here, in our Western cultures, it's not as normal to us, and it might even seem taboo to do some of the things that they're doing, but to them it's a way of life and a part of growing up. And then the second question asks us to address pornography, and as the book describes it, pornography requires no contact at all. It just portrays sexually explicit material. So that is pornography. The internet is providing a way for people to distribute illegal pornography. So in all states, it's a criminal offense to sell and produce these types of pornography that are seen as obscene or lewd. And it is currently debated on how far is too far on the internet and censorship and things like that. And so there's a lot of different legal and criminological issues associated with it. So it's kind of tricky here when you get into the definition of these obscene, more indecent pornographic publications. And so these are more so defined as pornographic material that are calculated to produce harm, and that can be something that has a negative effect on public morals, especially when it comes to children. So that's kind of where the law steps in on that. But it's not only about children, it's just violence and victimization of women and also men. So these things, when it comes to pornography and violence, the book does discuss some research that has been done in 1970 and 1986. And after analyzing the studies, it did conclude that exposure to pornographic materials leads to a greater acceptance of rape myths and violence against women. And it also resulted in sexual aggression against women in laboratories. So many feminists viewed this as a call to have more restrictions on pornographic material, and that any representation of people that are being sexually objectified is not okay. And it is also accompanied by or implied violence to encourage viewers to be more violent towards women. So when it comes to pornography on the internet, it's very easily accessible to everyone, including, kids and things like that. And so it's really important so there are restrictions in place to not have these kids, having access to these indecent materials, not just regular pornographic materials, but the obscene things as well. I'm not really going to get into that. The book talks about it. And so there was a law passed in 1996, which basically made it a felony to knowingly use a device to send an indecent communication to a child or to display indecent materials accessible to a child. But then there was some backlash to that after saying that the word indecent is overall vague, and there's really no way for any type of regulations when it comes to the internet that also don't overstep these lines of freedom of speech and things like that. It's also really hard to police things on the internet. Who's responsible for policing these things? So that's another struggle. But when I thought about this whole entire section, and mostly the obscene crimes and pornography that were mentioned in the book, I had a hard time coming up with connecting it to a theory, but then I had thought about Hershey's social control theory, which states that conforming behavior is formed through, attachment, commitment, belief, and involvement in family and personal goals and community and school and all these things. And it starts at a really young age. And then I thought about how if these are then weakened, it can lead to the criminal behavior. That's what the theory is stating. And so in this case, I feel like it's different for everyone. However, I feel as though weak family ties, and attachments, not having a community, not having any future success or personal goals, I feel like all these things can lead to criminal behavior. And so maybe that can explain why people are doing some of the things that they're doing online and why the violence is occurring and things like that.